expert in Washington, D.C. on the post-Soviet area. It's definitely yes. Thank you. Ariel, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Is this working? Yes. Great. Afternoon panels on the second day of a conference are tough, but I'll try to be brief. I'm getting messages already to wrap up. After we listened for 2 days, probably unprecedentedly grim assessments of economic management, of security management, of environmental management, I would like to take one case study, and that is a case study of nuclear reactors in war zones, and see what can we learn about it. Can I have some water, please? The International Convention of Physical Protection of Nuclear Materials and the international humanitarian law are the dispositive pieces of legislation, of international legislation, that should be providing security to nuclear reactors. Why is it important? Number one, because if, for example, a 6-unit, 6-reactor, Zaporizhzhia reactor, 1,000 megawatt each, is compromised, you can imagine what catastrophic consequences that will raise. But not just for Ukraine, for nuclear security in general. We are facing unprecedented complications in terms of climate change. Climate change is caused by CO2 emissions. Nuclear reactors generate electric power with 0 nuclear emissions. It would stand to reason the responsible leaders would go out of their way to maintain security of these nuclear reactors, right? And when you start sort of diving into these pieces of international law, I'm not practicing international law. I'm a lawyer in my past life, but you find out that there's no enforcement mechanisms. There are no even a stipulation how this can be imposed. IAEA went out of its way. They sent the mission to Ukraine. They talked to the Russians again and again, try to implement a modicum of security for Zaporizhzhia and to figure out what's going on in Chernobyl. And in Chernobyl, there are residual materials that, if mishandled, if the site is compromised, can again cause catastrophic consequences. Ladies and gentlemen, in the interest of time, I'll just give you my bottom line. The international mechanism to secure these reactors is broken. I'm not even sure it was designed to function, but it is not functioning. And if there's one thing that keeps you up at night, is an insecure, darn nuclear reactor, as the Europeans found out with Chernobyl, as the Japanese and the rest of the world found out with Fukushima. Now, let's take another incident where a foolproof security mechanism should have been created and was not. And that is the Budapest Memorandum that Ambassador Abu Saitov was involved in its creation. The Budapest Memorandum presupposed back in 1994 that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia, then quasi-democratic, the United States, the United Kingdom, will never need to do anything dramatic to keep the territorial integrity of Ukraine, Belarus, and Kazakhstan secure. Therefore, the measures that would make, for one of the parties, inconceivable to compromise the territorial integrity of these then newly independent states were not designed in that memorandum. Allowing Russia today, roll the film almost 30 years later, 28 years later, allowing Russia today, over the period of several last years, not just in February of this year, but before, since 2014, to violate the territorial integrity of Ukraine. The war did not start on February 24th of this year. It started in 2014, when they grabbed the Crimea and started war in Donbass. But in my travels to Moscow before COVID, I also found out that the Russian elites deliberately want to raise the heat of potential nuclear escalation vis-à-vis Washington, referring explicitly to the, quote, the Cuban Missile Crisis moment, unquote, in order to get, as they put it, the equal eye-level position, the equality of strategic posture between Moscow and Washington, and therefore getting the genie of nuclear blackmail out of the bottle. I will stop here and let it sink and move on to my conclusions. I've written 3 pieces on the bureaucratic failure of preventing a SARS-type infection after COVID started. SARS-type infections were not unknown. It was not a black swan. They happened again and again for 20 years preceding COVID. And when you go by every possible criteria, and I was focusing on the US, every administration, Democrat or Republican, ignored the writing on the wall, culminating with the Trump administration canceling the office at the National Security Council that was supposed to deal with this type of epidemics. Lisa, nothing to do with your work there. Why am I bringing COVID up? Why should I bring the inflation rates up, the inflation rate in the discussion about Ukraine, about the nuclear reactors, and about the Budapest Protocol? Because I will submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that all these events were predictable, and it was an enormous lack of leadership that led to economic policy, environmental policy, health policy, and security policy failures. It was not done by people who are crazy extremists, although I would argue, that's my personal opinion, Russia is trending in a very worrisome direction ideologically. It wasn't done by certifiable insane people. It was done by leaders who failed in their leadership responsibilities. I would probably venture, I'm not a historian of World War I, I would probably venture and say that the leadership failure before World War I may be comparable with what we're witnessing now. And the question probably for our next meeting would be, what can be done besides the obvious? Raising public awareness, working with youth, talking to diplomats, talking to decision makers. What can be done to recognize that the world, that is a very complex mechanism today? Because look what we're looking at here. We're looking at health care policy failure, economic policy failure, nuclear failure, diplomatic failure, etc. It's a very complex mechanism in which competence and leadership together may be the answer to resolve these events and to prevent these birds which are not black swans again. It was all predictable. All the writings are on the wall to prevent them from causing real catastrophes in which not just 6 million people that died, or 7 million, died of COVID, not tens of thousands or close to 100,000 that die in Ukraine, but many, many million of people who may die tomorrow. With that, I would thank the organizers, I would thank Ambassador Abu Saitov and Astana Forum, and offer my modest prayer for our future. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to get more content like this.